Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the library tour of Doom. This is a generational trap envisioned by Lord Ganesha and I to have you learning about my books forever. We are doing a library tour, but not in the usual way where we go to one of our 3 bookcases and go through the whole bookcase in one 15-minute video. No! We're not even going a shelf at a time. We're going one book at a time, and not just the books in my library, but the books that have ever been in my library. And also the ebooks. So it will be a long library tour. And today we are doing a book that has been in my library in the past. I've owned copies of this many times. I don't own one at the present as far as I know. I always had it as a mass market paperback, and recently I had my mass market paperback stacked 3 deep on a shelf above head level. Not just eye level, but head level in a hutch in the other room. So in other words, you couldn't know what was there, except for the ones that you could barely see underneath the roof of the hutch. You barely knew what was there. And recently, I took all of those mass markets down and put them on bookcases, not double stacked, just the way books should be. No double stacks, no nothing like that. And once I had them all set up like that, I organized them. Specifically, science fiction, mystery, and then everything else. It turns out the everything else was so small that I was able to patriate it to ordinary bookshelves, just mixed in with trade paperbacks and hardcovers. And that left science fiction and mystery. And the mass market science fiction filled one whole bookcase. And the mystery was a shelf and a half of another bookcase. But at least I took a whole afternoon. It wasn't torture by any means, though, so you all know that. That's the kind of afternoon you love. I shouldn't make it sound like it was torture. I took a whole afternoon to organize all of that stuff. Put all the duplicates next to each other so I could see how many copies I have of Lord Fowl's Bane. Put all of the mysteries together so I could see what I have and don't have. So I know for a fact that I don't have a mass market paperback of this book at the moment. But I nevertheless do recommend it in a limited way. This is by Michael Hodel and Sean Wright, 2 Sherlockians of the first water, and this is called Enter the Lion. That is the mass market paperback cover. And those of you who haven't heard of this book but are fairly keen-eyed will know right away. You'll be able to spot that isn't Sherlock Holmes. There's something just off about it. This is a big palooka, and you would be right about that because this is a novel about Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock Holmes's older brother, 7 years older than Sherlock, and much, much smarter, far more gifted in terms of observational insight, by Sherlock Holmes's own estimation. The finest mind in the country, only sedentary. When we meet him in The Problem of the Greek Interpreter, he doesn't really like to move, as Sherlock Holmes tells Dr. Watson. He would rather be thought wrong than prove himself right. He'd rather be thought wrong than go to the effort of proving any of his deductions, even though his deductions are better than Sherlock's. And these 2 authors imagine a past for Mycroft in which he wasn't always that way, in which 30 years before we meet him, 20 years before we meet him, he was an effective government agent. Before he becomes, as Sherlock Holmes puts it in a later story, before he essentially becomes the government. And that's where this novel comes in. This takes place years before we meet Mycroft in the Conan Doyle canon. This is during the years of the American Civil War, when, for a brief period, always exaggerated by proponents of the South, for a brief period, England was kind of sort of considering a partial, maybe a tiny bit material alliance with the Confederacy. It was never going to happen, never in a million years, but nevertheless, it was the fervent dream of the Confederacy was to get some sort of international recognition, which would mean money and armaments and also some sort of standing in the world. In that sense, as in many other senses, the founding fathers, the arch traitors who started the Confederacy, we're looking at the American Revolution, where that was the absolute lifeblood of the American Revolution. The American Revolution only succeeded because of international help. The French that Americans love to make fun of, the French people that Americans love to mock and make fun of, America wouldn't be here without them. And the plot of this novel involves machinations along those lines, and it draws in the government operative Mycroft Holmes at a time when Sherlock Holmes would have been in school. and would still have been brilliant. He appears in this book, but it wouldn't in a position to be the world's first unofficial consulting detective. And Mycroft Holmes isn't that either. This is a very different kind of Holmes pastiche. First of all, it's narrated by Mycroft Holmes. The authors do the Conan Doyle gimmick of saying that they're using Mycroft Holmes's papers, that they're just transmitting material. I love that. That device gets used a lot in Holmes pastiche fiction. But the one reservation I have about this book is that it's not really possible to salvage Mycroft Holmes. It's not really possible to you have to create him out of whole cloth. We don't have enough of him in the Conan Doyle canon to know anything about what he was like when he was younger. We don't have enough to know anything about what he's like when he's the age we meet him in the story. So this is largely just imagination. It's not. There aren't even any hints. There aren't even any clues. So we don't really know, and that means that the authors are largely on their own when it comes to plotting, and the plotting sometimes gets a little bit drawn out. This is a book with slow spots. Not many, and they're not bad. It's not the kiss of death by any means. Certainly not. Some of you will be much more familiar with a series of Mycroft Holmes adventures by an author named Fawcett from years and years after this. Those are actively boring. Quite a bit of them are actively boring. There's no book in that series that is free from actively boring sections, and there are a couple of books in that series that are just all boring from beginning to end. This is not that bad, and it has a pretty good climax. But the point that I want to make about it is that when it comes to Holmes pastiche fiction, you really can't do without this. When it comes to Holmes pastiche fiction, you're going to have a lot to choose from. There's pastiche fiction about literally everybody in the canon, including a rather engaging series of novels about Inspector Lestrade. Inspector Lestrade is a nemesis of Sherlock Holmes for quite a few stories, and begrudgingly admired by him in others, but he gets a series of books on his own that are actually quite good. And there are books about the Baker Street Irregulars. There are books about Mrs. Hudson, solves murder mysteries on her own plenty of times. And inevitable in that constellation is Mycroft Holmes, one of the most intriguing characters that Conan Doyle creates. So, of course, he's going to get books of his own. I'm surprised there aren't more. But as far as I know, and I'm pretty close to being caught up on this particular subject, I am a Holmes fan. Let's put it that way. As far as I know, there's never been a great Mycroft Holmes novel, and there could be. Oh my, there could be. but maybe it'll be a Zillennial that will write that book. Zillennials know all about being really smart and totally inactive. So maybe we've just been waiting on them. But in any case, that's your book for today, Enter the Lion. I don't think many Sherlock Holmes fans would disagree with me if I say that as far as things stand now, this is the greatest Mycroft Holmes novel of them all. I don't think I'd get much in the way of disagreement from that, so I'm going to go with it. But that is your library tour book for today. Who knows what the next one will bring? We shall see. Thank you, Book 2.